This is, who is this?
Who is this? Who is this?
Which identity do you prefer?
Well, we're not going to be, informing the IRS of your extracurricular.
You're not going to
activities.
turn this information over to the wrong people.
Right. The wrong people.
Okay.
All right.
Well, we'll begin with the political one, the one about the Nazi leaders.
First of all, begin who you are.
What's that?
Who are you?
Who am I?
Yes.
I am Marlon Brando. You don't think I'm Marlon? Well, I'll try my other identity. This is Mark Linenthal.
Yeah.
Late of San Francisco State University, and now retired. I'm a professor emeritus. I don't know what that really means, huh?
What does that mean?
It means a lot.
Does it put more in your paycheck? That's what I want to know.
No. I'm on a pension. I taught there for 1 million years. I taught there for about 30 years, more than 30 years.
What did you teach?
I was in 2 departments. I was in the English department, where they teach people to read, and in the creative writing department, where they teach people to write. You put the 2 together, you have a complete person. So I was in 2 departments. That's why I was so complete. And then for a long time I was director of the Poetry Center, which is sort of under the aegis of the creative writing department. How am I doing?
Doing very well.
You want, I want to sing you the song about the Nazi leaders.
Okay.
Goering, they say, had just 1 ball. Goebbels had 2, but very small. Himmler had something similar. I love the rhyme. And Hitler had no balls at all. That's why he lost the war, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
I thought it was guys like you dropping bombs on him
that helped.
Yeah.
That encouraged our allies. Yeah. I dropped the bombs once, and then that was the end of my contribution to the war effort. If we hadn't been shot down on our first mission, my navigation was so good that we probably would have lost the war.
So yeah, that's an interesting thing. Like when you're sitting in the airplane,
Yes.
do you know that it's going to go? Like when you get hit, you know you've been hit.
Well, the plane shook, and I'll tell you what happened. The plane shook, and the one engine was okay. A second one was not working. The third one had a runaway propeller, and the co-pilot looked at the fourth one and told the pilot that it was all full of holes. So we weren't in a spin or anything, we just very gradually lost altitude. And we flew for, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then bailed out at on the orders of the pilot, who was the commander of the whole thing.
Was it his maiden voyage too, or what?
Yes.
That was his first time out in combat?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So everybody survived the parachuting?
Everybody survived the parachuting, but one of there was a kid from somewhere in the South, I forget now where, whose name was Reuben Harkey. He was just a kid. He was engineer in the crew, and the others were all rounded up, and they saw his body on the back of a truck with a bullet hole through the hip. And apparently, the thing was investigated later as a possible war crime. but I think probably what happened was that he landed on the ground and he realized for the first time that he was in Germany, so he decided to run for it, and they shot him. I think that's what happened. Anyway, so 9 out of 10 made it home.
Were you all in the same camp?
The four, the pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, and navigator, I was the navigator, were sent to one camp. The enlisted man was sent to a sergeant's camp. They were corporals before the flight. They were immediately promoted to sergeant. So if they were taken prisoner, they would go to a sergeant's camp, which was better than the alternative.
Oh, so that was all pre-worked out.
Oh, yes.
Once you bailed out, you automatically became a sergeant.
Right. You know, I was a second lieutenant. And the lucky thing is, no matter what the Americans thought about second lieutenants, the Germans thought if you were a second lieutenant, you were actually an officer. So we were sent to an officers' camp, Stalag Luft number 1, which was a contraction of Stammlager, meaning a permanent camp, der Luftwaffe, of the Air Force, number 1. So it was a camp run by the Luftwaffe for Air Force officers. But as the war drew on and more prisoners came in, particularly after the Battle of the Bulge, when the Germans took lots of prisoners, our camp was swollen with people of all ranks, from all branches of the service. And then we were liberated by the Russians on May Day, no less. So it was a very entertaining experience. Also frightening.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because what was frightening was that I was shot down in September, and September 22nd, 1944, and I got to we were moved from one place to another, eventually ended up at Stalag Luft, and early in October, I think October 9th, something like that. And sometime, I believe it was in February of 45, that the order came out that the Jewish prisoners were to be segregated. And that was scary. And the Germans, I understand, it was explained by the Germans on the grounds that in this country, we were separating the Wehrmacht, you know, the rank and file, the German GIs, from the SS, because they were troublemakers. I mean, it just was easier to administer the whole thing. So as a retaliation, it was sort of interesting to think that as a Jew, I was really analogous to being a member of the SS, which I thought was an entertaining idea. Anyway, so here I am.
So here you are.
I am definitely here.
You are definitely here. In the house, as we say.
That's right. Now I'll tell you a story about the young man from Parnassus. You've heard my story. Now I'll tell you his story. There was a young man from Parnassus, this is very British, whose balls were made out of brass. When jostled together, they played stormy weather, and lightning shot out of his ass. Not to be confused with the lady named Hall, wore a newspaper dress to a ball. The dress caught on fire, burned up her entire front page sporting section and all. But the granddaddy of all limericks, I believe, was the hermit named Dave. This is an ingratiating little number. There once was a hermit named Dave who kept a dead whore in a cave. He said, "I'll admit I'm a bit of a shit, but think of the money I saved." That's pretty gross. Pretty gross.
But very funny.
Yeah, I think it's funny. What else? Did I mention others? I can't.
Well, we have the bishop.
Oh, yes. There were two girls from Birmingham, and this is the story concerning them. They lifted the frock and tickled the cock of the bishop while he was confirming him. The bishop, he was no fool. He'd been to a good public school. So he pulled down his breeches and fucked those two bitches with his 12-inch Episcopal tool. There.
I had no idea there was a second verse to that.
Oh, yeah. There are probably more. I don't know the others. I don't know what happened after that.
What about the Austin?
Oh, the man from Austin? There was a man from Boston who went for a ride in an Austin, a little teeny car. There was room for his ass and a gallon of gas, but his balls hung out and he lost them. Actually, there's a certain sameness to all of these limericks.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
They all end up in the outhouse somewhere or in bed.
What about some ones we can tell to the decorous ladies who might be out there?
What's that?
Do we have any clean jokes?
No. They're not funny.
They're not funny, are they?
No. You know, all humor is dirty because it recalls us to our animal selves. It reaffirms, I mean, we think we're a little lower than the angels, haha. But, and so we think that we are superior to our animal selves. But humor constantly brings us back to our humble natures, or humbler, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's right. Actually, I mean.
Yeah, I think it's true. When you think about it, tragedy, the difference between comedy and tragedy is that tragedy celebrates poise. And that is the high degree of inner organization that a human being is capable of under stress. But comedy celebrates the low level of inner organization you can get by on. So, whereas tragedy celebrates poise, moral poise, comedy celebrates sanity. That's why dirty jokes are very life-giving. Anyhow.
So where did you pick up your limericks from? Just.
Well, I went to Harvard. I majored in them. Yeah.
And Harvard is a prestigious
It used
university.
to be. It used to be. I guess.
Well, until they let you in, you mean?
Yeah, up until just before I No, I had a great time there. I majored in Radcliffe.
What's that?
There was the girls' school.
Oh, right.
Which has now become part of Harvard. You know, they used to keep them very separate. The guys professors would come to Harvard and teach a course, lecture, then walk, 10, 20 minutes away to Radcliffe and give the same lecture to the women. But they did away with that.
Ah.
While I was there, they started allowing Radcliffe women into Harvard classes.
Ah. So that was pretty late then that they sort of.
Yeah, I graduated in 43. I graduated a little early because I was on this wartime plan that allowed you to stay in school and get your degree, and then,
And get your ass shut off.
Huh?
Then go out and get your ass shut off.
That's right.
They wanted fellows from good schools to.
Yeah, of course. You can't win a war if you've gone to the wrong school. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
That's built into our social structure.
Apparently, that's what put the fear of God into the Germans.
They heard the Harvard men were coming. Well, Harvard must not be confused with Yale. You know about the difference between them?
No.
Well, there are two men in the men's room standing at the urinal, and the Yale man does his business, and then he walks over to the wash bowl and washes his hands. And the Harvard man does his business and walks out. And the Yale man hurries up and gets hold of him and says, "Hey, what's the matter with you? Didn't they teach you to wash your hands after you pee at Harvard?" And the Harvard man said, "At Harvard, they teach us not to pee on our hands." So there's the difference. So that's why the Germans were so scared when they heard that Harvard men were coming.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you grew up where in Connecticut?
I was in Boston.
Boston, Massachusetts.
Yeah, and Roxbury, which is a sort of part of Greater Boston. And then the family moved. While I was at Harvard, the family moved from Roxbury to Cambridge, so they wanted to keep their eye on me.
Ah.
I was a very bad student because I was majoring in Radcliffe.
A bit of a distraction there.
Yes, yeah, I believe it was.
Yeah. No,
But I did graduate.
Yeah.
So I figured that's a kind of triumph.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's good to get it under your belt.
Right. Then in prison camp, I decided I'd go back to Harvard and get a master's. But I changed my area of concentration. As an undergraduate there, I had majored in political science. And I sat around in prison camp thinking that if you study political science, you spend a couple of years learning the terms and a couple of years learning how to manipulate them. It didn't have very much to do with any human actuality. This is a bit of an exaggeration, but I felt that way. And I started reading seriously in prison camp, and that's what decided me to go back to Harvard and get a master's in English. And the single book that did it was Howard's End, E.M. Forster's novel, Howard's End. The interesting thing was I read, it so happened there was a lot of E.M. Forster in the prison camp library. And I read A Room with a View and Howard's End, and a little critical book called Aspects of Fiction. And then I came back to Cambridge after the war and discovered that suddenly E.M. Forster was all the rage. I mean, he had been sort of, resuscitated.
Yeah. Well, when did he write those books?
Before the First World War.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Howard's End was written, I think, around 1907, 1908, in there, 1909. That's a wonderful novel.
How did the films match up to the? How do you?
I mean, they couldn't. I mean,
Yeah, I mean the book is they're complicated books anyway. I mean,
yeah,
there's a lot.
but they didn't. Oh, I also read Passage to India. You know, I thought Passage. The movies don't get at the you might say the mystical side of Forster. What appealed to me about Forster was he combined a kind of social progressivism, what we would call liberalism, with a kind of nature mysticism, and in both Howard's End and Passage to India, that mystical thing is enacted by a female character. And the movies don't really get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Although I think it's, from a thematic point of view, really very much at the heart of the book. Howard's End is somebody pointed out that Howard's End is really a kind of allegory about England, and it raises the question who is going to inherit England. And the inheritor of Howard's End is a country house, and by the time the novel is over, it's about to be inherited by an illegitimate child, who therefore is classless. So there's a kind of implicit judgment of the whole British class system. Yeah, I almost met Forster, almost. We were in, Francis and the kids and I were in Cambridge, and I went to the college where he lived, and I went inside and went to his room and knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He was, what do they call it, sporting the oak, you know. There was an outer door, an oak door, and that was shut. And I think that was a signal that he didn't want to be disturbed. I think he had just come back from a trip somewhere. But he played a very important part of my intellectual life.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right.
I told you everything. I don't know anything else.
That was pretty painless, wasn't it?
Huh?
That was pretty painless.
Yeah, moderately. Are we done?
We've got plenty of tape if you have anything else you want to let us know about.
What do I want to let you know about? No, I don't know anything else. You know, my friends, at Harvard, there was a thing called Phillips Brooks House, which was an institution that allowed privileged Harvard boys to teach the great unwashed, you know. And they came around to my room in my freshman year. Incidentally, my friends made great fun of me as a result of this story. They came around to enlist me, to get me to agree to teach something in this Phillips Brooks House program. And I said, this is I was very innocent. I said, I can't teach anything. I don't know anything. I realize it sounds funny if you say it now, but at the time I just meant it. I didn't know anything, nothing worth teaching. I didn't become a self-conscious intellectual for some years.
Well, it's interesting. A friend of mine's daughter is getting her PhD, and she's like 25 or 26 or something. She's working, and I'm thinking, you know, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but to me, like a PhD should sort of come after many years of study of the subject, not just as the next step up past your master's degree.
Well, you have to write a thesis. You know,
but for the same reason, I'm thinking, well, you know, how much can you know? You know.
Yeah, that's true. But I did my PhD at Stanford, and there were comprehensive exams in English.
Right. How old were you though?
I did it in, what, 50... How old was I?
You're probably in your 30s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my 30s. What was I going to tell you?
Stanford's PhD program.
Oh yeah, you had to take a certain number of courses, particularly a course in bibliography and methods, how to use the library, which I never learned. I still don't know how to use libraries. And there were 4 or 5 exams, sort of survey exams on English literature, beginning with, you know, Anglo-Saxon and going all the way up to 19th and 20th century British and American literature. So you had to take those 4 exams, and you had to pass, there were 2 language requirements. My French was really pretty good, so that was no problem. And my German, I could, with a dictionary, I could, you know, manage in German. So there were 2, you know, that was a lot. You had to do the languages and pass the exam, and then write a dissertation, and then have an oral exam, which questioned you on matters related to the dissertation. And the whole experience was actually very educational, because it forced you to take a broad range of materials and organize them, put them all together in your head, and then present them. And never again in your life do you do that, you see. Never again do you. Now, I think they have, I think the exams, that was around 1957, I think. So I was 36 when I finally finished up. I had started teaching at San Francisco State by then. I started there in 1954. And I was married then to Peter's mother, Alice Adams, who became quite an eminent writer in later years.
How did you end up in San Francisco?
We came out west for me to go to Stanford.
Oh, okay, that was.
And that did it. And I was very disappointed in Stanford when I first saw it first, because it didn't look like a college to me. I mean, my notion of what a college is supposed to look like came from New England. You know, red brick and beautiful grounds, and Stanford looked like a chem lab in the desert somewhere. I mean, it did, you know, it was spread out all over the place. You really needed a bicycle or a car to get around. And I think my feelings about Stanford, I'm sure it's very different from what it was then. But my feeling about Harvard was that you could get a wonderful education at Harvard without going to class, because there was so much there were so many people around who were interested in so many things. You could always find people who were interested in the same thing. But at Stanford, that was impossible. If you wanted an education, you had to get it the old way. There was no sense of a real intellectual community at Stanford, and I found that disappointing. People just sort of stayed in their own cubicles of interest, you know. I mean, there was a guy who taught poetry, the theory and practice of the criticism of poetry, Iva Winters, who was an old curmudgeon, but who was an interesting teacher, troublesome but interesting. And there was a guy in the philosophy department named Arnold Eisenberg, and I knew him because he had, from many years ago, when he had been dating my sister. So I knew him. But Winters and Eisenberg never knew each other, you know, which I thought was too bad. Too bad for students.
Yeah.
Students should see the, you know, the impingement of one.
The collision of the collision of continents.
What's that?
The collision of continents.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one of the most interesting pieces of teaching I ever did, I did with my friend Anatole Anton in the philosophy department. He and I taught a course called, which combined poetry and philosophy, and we taught it together. It all started, we used to have conversations at night because we both taught a night class, and we'd meet there and have dinner together. And we had these wonderful conversations. And I said to Anatole, you know, the kids, the students, should hear this conversation we're having now. So we talked the dean into letting us both get teaching credit for being in the same classroom. You know, funding and so on was complicated. And we did it each spring semester for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. We began with a course called First Person Singular in Poetry and Philosophy. That is, first person singular being I. The whole relation between the poet, the actual poet, and the I in the poem is mysterious. I mean, not simple, and modern psychology has thought a lot about that first person singular. And then as each year that we taught it, the title came from a poem by Robert Creeley. The idea for first person singular it was called I Speaks, which came from a poem by Robert Creeley that begins this way: as soon as I speak, I speaks. Which points to the fact that the I in the poem is really not so much the creature of the poet, but the creature of the poem. In other words, if you want to see who that I in the poem is, you don't look at the poet, you look at the rest of the poem. That was fun. I like that poem anyway. As soon as I speak, I speaks. It wants to be free, but impassive lies in the direction of its words. Let X equal X. X also equals X. I had not known something had such undone. It was an idea of mine. That's the whole poem. I like that poem.
X equals X.
He just died fairly recently.
American?
Yeah, he taught it at Buffalo, New York. he was a very important figure in 20th century American poetry. For a while, he was the most influential poet, I think, writing in America. I mean, all the kids were trying to write like him. So,
All right.
here we are. I think I'm all talked out.
Okay. That's quite a statement from you.
As I told you, I don't know anything.
That's quite a statement from you. You're all talked out, eh?
Yeah.
So, do we have at least one more limerick we can end with, or?
Oh dear. Help me.
Let me think.
I can't think of another one right offhand. I told you we should have written these down so I would remember them.
That's right. Well, you better. That's your homework.
I'm stuck. I don't know any more limericks. I know them, but I can't find them.
Right.
That's what happens with Alzheimer's, you know. You ask somebody with Alzheimer's to recite some limericks, and he can't do it. Anyhow.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Linenthal.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
Very good. Very good.
And I don't want you to show this to the wrong kind of people.
No, so I won't be showing it to your son then.
Okay. No, you can show it to him.
Okay. All right.
He knows all this stuff. You know, he knows the worst of me.